Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Jamal Simmons back with us today. We'll chat with Jamal in just a second, but first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review, and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Jamal Simmons is a political commentator on CNN and co-host of the new podcast, Trailblaze. He's previously served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Communications Director to Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House. Before that, he was a political contributor for CBS News and NPR and hosted digital interviews for HillTV. He is a veteran of the Clinton administration, Congress, and several political campaigns. He's also been a communications consultant, digital entrepreneur, appeared on every major television network, and has written opinion pieces for many newspapers. Jamal, welcome back into the back room.
Good to be back, Andy. Thanks for having me.
So it's been quite a week, and there's a lot going on with Donald Trump's crazy cabinet appointments, which I definitely want to get into with you in just a little bit. But it seems like a year ago, but we had an election a week ago. So I want to ask you a few questions about that, because that is a very critical, consequential event that happened. You and I are Democrats.
For sure.
We're sitting here. We had hope, we had excitement, we had euphoria, we had joy. We were going to have a black South Asian woman as president. We were going to have a Jewish first man. All this progress that we dream of was going to just push us into the future. What happened?
Oh, yeah. We were on our way. I think, it's been a week or so, and I'm reflecting back on it. And the more I think about it now, we asked a lot of the American people in a very short period of time. Now, listen, I'm not letting them off the hook, because the person they chose was a convicted criminal, right? With a history of thievery and sexual assault and, all the bad things that we don't want our children to be, including just being a general asshole, it seems like in many ways. So I don't want to let them off the hook. But, remember when Barack Obama ran for president? He had 2 years to get the country ready to make the kind of change that it made when it elected the first black man president. Kamala Harris had 100 days, 107, right? That's not a long time to have to figure that out and to wrap your mind around it for the average person. So that was against her. Inflation numbers, people were very concerned about inflation. That was against her. The right track, wrong track was bad. And then Joe Biden's numbers were bad. And the truth is, the last two vice presidents we elected to office were basically third terms of the president they served, right? Like, people liked they liked Reagan, and they elected George H.W. Bush. They liked Barack Obama, and Joe Biden basically ran on being Barack Obama's vice president when he ran in 2020. And then you think about Al Gore, who I worked for, who, people felt conflicted about Bill Clinton, and Al Gore got a conflicted result, right? I mean, the popular vote went for him, but the Electoral College didn't by a sliver. So in that sense, there was no empirical evidence that says she should have won, right? What made it seem possible was that she was running against one of the most outrageous and onerous figures of, modern political times. And the idea that when faced with the choice between these two people, people would choose a competent, able woman who wanted to lead the country with competent, able people. And that's not what they did.
But why do you think, I'm going to push back just a little bit here, because I have very strong opinions on this. Why do you think, we understand MAGA. We get it, why they did it. But Trump appealed to so many of members of the traditional Democratic coalition. He ate into areas in New York City, white people, white women. When I think about that, it's hard for me not to just drill down to sexism and racism, as ugly as that sounds. And, we always hear the expression, oh, this is not who we are. But I feel like after this election, we can all kind of look back and go, no, this is exactly who we are. We did it. November 5th, we showed exactly who we are. We took that convicted felon, adjudicated rapist, pathological liar, dictator wannabe. My God, we can go on and on and on, the adjectives. But we chose him over the highly competent black woman. So it's hard for me to escape, And as a Jew, I was.
I'm not going to get you off of it.
Yeah, no. So I saw Doug in the White House as a Jew. That made me very happy. So the sexism, racism, anti-Semitism, like it's hard for me to escape that. Your take on that?
We had all the isms. I mean, look, we are racist, sexist, we're homophobic, we're anti-Semitic. We have it all, right? We're classist, and all of us are this way in some. Somewhere along the dial of it, because we all live in the soup, in the stew that is America. And America was basically founded with the idea that only straight Christian land-owning white men were supposed to be involved in the democracy, right? And so what we have been doing over the course of the last 250 years, but maybe it was just the last 240 years before Donald Trump came, is we have been kind of clawing our way toward the ideal of what the founding document said, even though they didn't found it in that ideal, right? They founded it in something that was much messier. And so I think that, yes, racism, sexism. Look, this is a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to say. I think it is. But it is true now. We are seeing, and we had some evidence before. We're seeing it now. Maybe there are a lot of white women who don't see Black women's success as their success. Right? We certainly know that women aren't really gender voters. I mean, Hillary learned that. We've seen that repeatedly. Women don't really vote as gender as the primary issue for them. And the one that really gets me, right? The one that really, really gets me is the people who voted to protect abortion rights in their states and then voted for Donald Trump. Those people, you're going logical on me. Right. Only one reason. What could it be? What could it be?
Yeah.
Why didn't they vote for this woman?
Well, it seems pretty contradicting to vote that way. That kind of split ticket stuff is insane. The voting for the ballot measures, enshrining or codifying abortion rights, and then vote for the guy who killed it all and who promises to do even more damage, and things that we know are going to hurt women and families. Yeah. But yet, this issue, which we thought was going to be such a driver, Dobbs, Roe, and yet women didn't seem to care. The men who love them didn't seem to care. They cared more about Joe Rogan and crypto. I mean, it's crazy.
This is a place where I go back to where I started, which is we know all of these isms exist in us. We know that they are part of our American story. I believe that we can get past them. I just think that we have to work at it. And I don't think that Kamala Harris had enough time to work at it, to get people comfortable with the idea of having this particular woman in office and that she could be the one that would lead. And I think there were people who just never quite really bonded with her. And the fact that they didn't bond with her, they were willing to, I think, succumb to the darker angels of their nature, right? And they went along with Donald Trump. But given more time, I think a woman could actually do this. I think a woman could win the White House. When Hillary ran the last time, if you add her votes and Jill Stein's votes up together, they got 50% of the vote. So I think people will vote for a woman. I just think that we got to work at it. We've got to get right over that edge. And if I were on that campaign, what I would have advised is that Kamala Harris give kind of a speech very similar to the race speech that Barack Obama gave, or to do something that really addressed it. Because if we're going to ask people to take a leap, we got to walk them through it, right? We can't just assume that they're going to be motivated by these better angels. We got to talk about it. And I always talk about, like, if there's a spider on the table and people are scared of it, they can't hear anything else that you say because they're focused on the spider on the table. You got to deal with the spider. Once you deal with the spider, then they'll talk to you about whatever else it is you want to mention. But until you deal with the spider, they can't hear anything else you say.
Yeah. But it's such a high bar. Van Jones now famously said Donald Trump can be lawless. She had to be flawless.
Yeah.
That ceiling, the glass is like that thick bulletproof glass, right? For it to eventually shatter just seems like, what will it take? I personally thought she did a great job connecting. I thought she connected with people. I don't think she was able to connect with people who weren't ready for a Black woman president. But that's not really her fault in the sense of certainly the truncated amount of time she had in this campaign. But you mentioned George Bush before. George Bush was the guy you want to go have a beer with. People chose over her the guy you would share a cell with, right? Like, this is where it came down to. It's like People chose a monster over her.
Listen, here's what I'll say on this too. I'm a black man in America, and I have seen this movie a lot. This is not,
of course,
it's not that fantastical to me that that's what happened. That people, race can still be a driving factor, but it's like when you go and visit a friend's house as a black person, you go and visit a friend's house and you walk in the door and their family is like trying to be nice to you, but they just are clumsy and they're bumbling over themselves because they just never really had like a black person in the house before, or somebody that's like around. I had one friend of mine, whose dad just started talking to me about Denzel Washington, like out of the blue. Like, Denzel Washington is my favorite actor. Okay, I thought we were talking about, like what your wife was making for dinner, but sure. Okay, we can talk about that if you want. But what happens over the course of a weekend when you're spending time with people is they kind of get used to you. You realize like, oh, we got some stuff in common. Oh, you like to play this game. I like to play that one. You watch these movies. I watch ones just like those. And so people over the course of time get more comfortable and familiar. That's why I say she just didn't have enough time, because you do have to give people time to get comfortable with this change that it is that they're about to make before you ask them to take a big leap.
So I want to stick with that because you're raising what I think is a really good point. I tend not to dwell. I tend to look forward. I don't know what you know of my story, but I've had something horrible happen to me a bunch of years ago.
For sure.
And, and it's like, okay, I can crawl on the floor and cry like a baby for the rest of my life, or I can pick myself up and move forward and rebuild my life. And that's what I did. And so I'm more concerned with where do we go from here? You mentioned we can do this again. We can get back to some sense of normalcy and have progress and be on the right track. What does that look like when seemingly half this country is in a cult? Part of the other half just looks at that glass ceiling and is like, nah, can't, not yet. If you were making the plan, what would you be suggesting? What does the DNC need to do? Does it need to go back to Howard Dean and the 50-state strategy and just get in there and talk to farmers and people in the heartland now and not wait 3 years from now? Like, what is the path forward here to get us back?
Yeah, well, first, I wouldn't use a term like normal, right? I think that we are in a new era, and part of what Democrats and those of us on the left have to embrace is that things have changed. The way we communicate has changed. It's more brash. This idea of the etiquette of the old politics, I think, is going away. I think Donald Trump. The seeds for it, the kindling existed before Trump, but Trump has lit the fire and he's burned it all down in a sense of like how we pay attention to it. So I think we are going to have to be more brash. We're going to have to be more bold, those of us on the left. We're going to have to go after the things that we want to go after and say the things that we believe, even when people don't like it. I mean, one of the things people did here, I heard back about Kamala Harris, and you can see this in some of the AOC. There were all these voters who voted for Trump and voted for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And one of the things that comes back when she asked them why is they just felt a connection. They felt like she was an outsider and Trump was an outsider. We have got to get, the left has to get on the side of the people who feel left out and left behind again. What we can't be is in the position of defending institutions that many people in America don't feel are helping them, right? We can't just say democracy has to work. Democracy has to work so that you can get certain things, right? So we're defending the democracy in order to improve your life in some tangible ways, not just because this concept is under attack. We can't just say that, we are for, market capitalism because it's the best way to create wealth in the world. We're for market capitalism, if you are, because we believe it's the best way for you to make money, to buy a house for your family, to put your kid through school, to whatever. And then we've got to make the changes. We got to be on the side of reform. So not just defending it in principle, but like, here's the reforms we want to make. Here's how we want to change it so that we can make it work for you. So in that sense, Howard Dean's organizing strategy is great. We do have to do 50 states. I'm not really a Bernie guy, but I think Bernie's approach to this, which is to be on the side of the outsiders, to challenge the big institutions, to talk about the hard questions that nobody else wants to address. And that leads me to my last point, which is Donald Trump was very good at talking about the anxiety that people felt and naming it. And then he channeled it towards something that I think was destructive. We ignored naming the anxiety. We ignored really talking about this anxiousness people might feel about culture change and job loss, and the fact that I just saw today it costs you have to make over $100,000 a year in order to have a house, where today we're used to have to make $58,000 a year. We've got to be able to name those things and say, here's how we're going to fix them for you. Because we agree with you that banks are out of control. We agree with you that prices are out of control. And anyway, so we got to get better at talking directly to people about the concerns they have.
And that's interesting, because there's a lot of people who are saying we went to quote unquote woke, got to move away from that, whatever that is. Okay. We got to get more centrist, right? But what you're speaking to is something I agree with, and I've come full circle on Bernie Sanders in particular. I've never really been a true fan of Bernie Sanders, but hindsight sometimes gives us a perspective that's really interesting. And there are people who love Trump and also love Bernie Sanders, and they would vote for either one of them. And
they voted for Barack Obama.
Yeah, yes,
which is crazy.
So
right?
So the point you're raising is Bernie Sanders isn't going to the center. He's pushing. No. He's pushing that leftist ideology, but it's not leftist. It's what you're saying. It's just what the dude on the street and his wife and his family are telling us that is wrong with this country. And Trump masterfully listened to them, twisted it in an evil way.
But I call it 3D politics. 3D politics. It's not just left, right, but it's outsiders versus insiders, right? And the thing about Barack Obama is he always was an outsider. When he ran for the state Senate, he had to beat the local Democratic establishment. When he ran for the U.S. Senate, he had to beat some of the most powerful people in Illinois that he had to beat to win that primary to become a United States Senator. When he ran for president, Hillary was the establishment Democrat in 2008. He had to beat the establishment in order to get there. So he always had like an outsider's gait. He had an outsider's swagger. And I think people appreciated the fact that it was him against the machine, right? They liked that about him. Frankly, I mean, Kamala Harris is great. She was an insider.
Yeah.
Well, her whole career was inside the institutions of California politics and then national politics. And so she just kind of had the kind of the weight of the inside on her. And so she would have had to really pivot against the insiders and the institutions to make the same case that I think Trump is trying to make.
Well, it's also something interesting you're raising, because we've always talked about in this country that people are sick of the two-party system. But what you're really saying is that we kind of have three parties. It's not independence. It's just people who just are fed up, or they want disruption, or they're outsiders, as you say. And it's a riff off of what people were saying a few weeks ago, where maybe it was Bakari Sellers, I think, who was saying this the most, that there's the Republican, the Democrat, and the couch, right? Those were the three people on the ticket. Right. Well, this is kind of like the enhanced philosophy of that, which is it's not just a candidate, the couch, it's now a party. There's a whole bunch of people in this country that couldn't give a shit about politics, couldn't tell you who politicians are, but they're just talking about issues. And to them, it's like, just give me somebody real, give me somebody authentic, somebody who's going to shake up this shit and give me the spoils that I see everybody else getting. And that's, when you
cut
think
me in.
Cut me in. And that's all. That's what Bernie Sanders is. You should be cut in, right? And so I think that's where we got to go. And I don't think we have to, be subjugated in terms of our ideals and our principles. I just think we got to maybe get out of our own, coastal elite heads. I hate saying that, but that's kind of seems like where we may have been,
It is very true. And I think, there are all these things that existed during the campaign. People who didn't trust the fact that Democrats in their opinion, didn't tell the truth about Joe Biden, right? That for months, we had been telling everybody Joe Biden was fine and healthy. He just was, maybe his body was a little slow, but his mind was fine. And then he gave that debate, and he didn't look like he was okay.
Right.
He didn't look like he was okay. And so people didn't necessarily trust us very much because of that. We seemed like we were covering up for somebody, another insider. I think, we're going to have to get uncomfortable. We're going to have to do things that make our friends uncomfortable. We're going to have to be for policies that make us uncomfortable. Donald Trump is running a scam too, before we get out of this, because I don't all be about Democrats. Donald Trump is running a scam. His tariff plan is basically like a 1990s trade agenda, right? The jobs that have been lost to trade are gone. They've been gone for 20 years, 15 years. 95% of them are already gone. Of course, there's always going to be some friction in the marketplace. You know what's coming now? AI. The job loss that is going to happen when AI gets permeated through the system is going to make trade job loss look like a picnic. But nobody's talking about that. We really don't have an agenda for how we're going to manage AI, what we're going to do for people who are trying to, have a company or even be in the business of making movies, right? Like you talk to movie directors or actors, they're like, oh, we'll all be displaced by AI bots that'll be writing these films in 10 years. What do we do when AI comes online in a really massive way and everybody's got to figure out how to make a living? We got to think about what's next. That's the other thing as Democrats. There's the problem today. There's a problem coming that everybody can sort of see, but they need a guide. They need somebody who's going to shine the light and say, follow me. I'm at least going to talk to you about the thing that's happening and we'll figure it out together. I got a few ideas, but we're going to have to figure some of this out together.
Mm-hmm. So let's shift to the craziness of this week. We started off seeing Marco Rubio, fairly conventional, mainstream, putting aside policy agendas and all that. Just, okay, not a shock. He's a senator. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee. And then started to take a turn. And yesterday it was like, Matt Gaetz and then Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth. And it's just gotten bonkers. And I'm astonished. I'm astonished because I watched some cable news and the discussions are still, do you think the Republican Senate will do the right thing and put country before party? And I'm sitting there in my living room going, are you fucking kidding me? After 9 years, we're still asking that question. So my attitude now is they're just going to take that big giant rubber stamp and do whatever the hell he wants. What do you think? Do you think someone like Matt Gaetz has a chance of actually becoming Attorney General?
I think one or two of these people are going to catch a break, right? Not everybody's going to make it. Just because it is bad enough. And there are enough senators where it matters. The question is, did Donald Trump put them through what's called a recess appointment, right? Where they don't have to have the full Senate vote, Senate vote on it. That's the part that's dangerous. Now, recess appointments can only last for a year, then they have to leave. But you could do a lot of damage in a year. And if you're Matt Gaetz, who is not an adjudicated criminal, but he's been highly investigated for criminal activity, I think then you have to wonder what other damage they'll do. I don't have any confidence really in the Republicans being able to figure this out. And I kind of feel like there's not nothing we can do about it. We got to focus on it and pick our spots about where we're going to stand up. And look, if you find 4 Republicans who are going to stand up to Donald Trump, then the Democrats need to get with those 4 Republicans and stop the worst things from happening. But I'm much more worried about the Democrats. I'm much more worried about Democrats also building community and relationship with people who are left out. And why is it that we have to have union members who their leadership sides with Democrats, but then they go for the Republican? Or you've got, white women who, we thought we were going to beat the spread, and turns out like we didn't beat the spread, with men. So I think the women vote for Harris was 53%, and the male vote for Trump was 55%. Right? That's it right there. That's the story of the election. So we've got to figure out, how is it that we get more in touch with the folks that we need to talk to, and we become trusted messengers? Because here's the thing: Donald Trump is setting up for failure. This is all going to be, whatever happens, whichever one of these people get there, it's going to be a shit show. Mm-hmm. It's going to be bad. And when it's bad, and the people realize how bad it is, will they view us as credible partners to turn to try to stop it, or will they think, pox on all their houses, I'm just going to go back to whatever I was doing yesterday and check out and, play FanDuel and hang out with my friends because I can't do this anymore.
Well, I happen to agree with you. I was just telling somebody before that I think that the only hope that I have, because I don't rely on Congress.
Yeah.
Haven't in a while. Certainly I'm not relying on the Supreme Court. I mean, this is how bad that Supreme Court immunity decision was. Donald Trump on January 21st can sit with, hypothetically, Matt Gaetz or whoever his attorney general is and say, I want to murder Liz Cheney. And that cannot never be used as evidence against him because that's with his department. It's in the course of his daily duties, as insane as that sounds. But my hope is that, and this is what I think you were saying, you look at this clown show of cabinet nominations. It's like Lord of the Flies, right? And you got to assume that the ineptitude from top to bottom, the incompetence from top to bottom can create nothing but chaos. Yeah. So how are they ever going to get anything done?
Yeah. Here's the thing. We have a conceit maybe that we think they might want to govern. Right. I'm becoming convinced that Steve Bannon's philosophy is right. They just want to, quote unquote, deconstruct the administrative state. The whole idea, the purpose is to not govern and to take it all down. Right. Now, take care of your friends, pass some tax cuts so that your friends get more money, all the billionaires get more money, do a couple other little things that you can do. But ultimately, they are trying to corrupt the federal government to the point where nobody recognizes it, nobody can trust it, and the idea that you want to come and make it work becomes farcical to people. And I talk to people who lived in other countries, right? People who moved here with their families from other places. And what they've said to me is, when you live in a country where the only way you can get anything from the government is to know somebody or pay somebody, what happens is everything gets dumbed down. Everything gets hard. You can't trust the regulations. You can't buy food at the grocery store because you don't know if that store is actually good. So there are networks where people say, oh, this is a store we all trust. So everybody goes to the store everybody trusts because those people do it. You can't just randomly stop at a market and pick up something off the shelf because it's unregulated now, right? That's Robert F. Kennedy's FDA. When RFK Jr. is in charge of the healthcare policy of this country, you won't be able to trust anything that you go into a store and buy because who knows what's inside that package. So everything gets devolved kind of like these community standards where we all live in our little tight-knit communities. It's like, I don't know if you ever read Octavia Butler, but we are marching directly toward a dystopian future envisioned by science fiction writers a generation ago.
Yeah. Well, here's the part about me that still hangs on to a little bit of optimism. We still have the rule of law. We still have the Constitution. We still have judges, even Trump-appointed Republican judges who have held to the rule of law in the last several years. Politics is cyclical. We have governors. We have state legislatures. Politics is cyclical, as you know, and 2 years comes around really, really quickly. And given the chaotic shit show we know that's going to be the Trump administration 2.0, the biggest question, though, is what you said. When and if there is that chaos and inflation doesn't come crashing down from the 3% it is now, and gas prices aren't $1.90 a gallon, and all the things Trump was promising, will the electorate be able to recognize it and say, now, I'm going back to these people. It's the Democrats. Yeah. They got to fix it. The DNC has to ensure in the next 2 years that they have a plan starting today to prime the electorate to be in that position come 2 years from now.
Yeah. And I would just say, will they go forward to Democrats, right? Because I don't think anybody ever wants to go back.
Right,
right. I know you said it just as rhetorical, but I think it's a good mental exercise that we have to be leaning into the future of what this country can be and how it can be better for working people in this country.
Absolutely. Jamal, another great conversation. Thanks for coming on, and I'll look forward to the next chat.
Thanks for having me, and we'll see you on Trailblaze sometime.
All righty. Absolutely. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.